Hi, my name is Judith, and today I will present the effects of learning foreign languages in different stages of adulthood. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. I will give you a brief introduction into my study. Then diving into the theoretical background, I will talk to you about all the information that I researched, the questions and the hypotheses I had, and after that I'll go into the method. So I will explain what my study consisted of with all the results, the discussion, and the conclusion. In order to give you a brief summary of my study, I'm going to take this quote from this German psychologist, Karl Albrecht: "Change your language and you change your thoughts." And I will reinvent this quote in order to make it more fitting to what my study really consists of. So now the quote reads, "Change your language and you change your brain." This is a great summary of my study, since I'm going to be talking about the way that learning different languages affects people's brains. Going into this research project, I had a few objectives. The first one was a personal one, since I've been trying to figure out how the brain works, so that's a question that's been in my head for a long time. And even though I'm not quite there yet, I feel like studying it has helped me figure out some of the brain processes. The next one was an informational one. I had taken some classes on cognitive science and neurolinguistics prior to doing this project, so I wanted to organize this information that I had acquired and give an insight to it. Lastly, I had a methodological one where I wanted to have contact with experts to see if there was a dichotomy between what the study said compared to what the experts would be able to tell me right away from the current situation in the field. We will move on now to the theoretical background of the study. In order to understand all the different processes that the brain undergoes through the lifespan, I wanted to do research on brain development. This gave me an insight into the different stages that the brain has. The first one is the settlement, when in our childhood our brains are trying to create and destroy neuronal pathways. These are really useful in the second stage, the experimenting, when we're teenage years and then we're trying to learn from all the input that we have from emotions and experiences. After this, we have the enhancing phase. This is when we are young adults, so between the ages of 20 and 35, where we're reaching a cognitive peak and our brains are the best they are ever gonna be. Lastly, we have the declining phase. This happens from after 35 on to the end of our lives, and our brains are slowly but surely declining and atrophying. So another thing I looked into are the different areas of the brain that are most thought to have a key aspect in language. The first one is the Broca's area that helps with language production and speech articulation. And the second one is the Wernicke's area that helps with language comprehension. Gray matter and white matter are not really areas of the brain, but they are in our bodies, mainly in our brains, but also in our spinal cords, and they are matters. So white matter helps with connectivity, so it helps with all the areas being connected, and gray matter helps with information processing, personality, and intelligence. The last two areas of the brain I'm going to talk about are the angular gyrus and the motor cortex. The first one deals with attention and memory retrieval, and the second one deals with movement and articulation, so for example, for speech production. Another important topic in my study are the different neuroimaging techniques that scientists use in order to check the differences in the brain before and after learning languages. This first one is the MRI. Through radio waves, scientists are able to check if the structure of the brain has changed before and after. The second technique is fMRI. Scientists are able to check different brain functions thanks to this technique. If you see, there are in the images some areas that are red, orange, or yellow, and what this indicates is that there is blood flow in these areas. This is really useful because then scientists are able to check that participants given different tasks might have different areas being lit up in the scan. Here we have the last two techniques. On the very left, we have the EEG. This one has electrodes that takes electrical signs thanks to neural activity. On the right, the last two pictures, we have the MEG, which takes the fluctuations of the electrical signs. They are relatively similar in a way with the previous ones, so the MRI and fMRI techniques, but these are more expensive. Nonetheless, they are useful since they allow scientists to check what is happening in the brain in real time. So they could give a task to a participant and check at the same time what the brain or what their brain is doing. One more thing I wanted to mention from my background information are the different language learning theories. One of them is the critical period hypothesis that was supported by Locke, the philosopher. This hypothesis states that there's a certain age in childhood and young teenagehood where people are able to learn languages to a native-like proficiency, but after that, one is not able to learn them to a native-like proficiency. Then there's the localization view, which states that different areas of the brain that are working towards language work individually with their own tasks, sort of like a chain, rather than all of them working as a network. And the last thing I looked into are the different contexts and the different types of bilinguals. Because I'm dealing with multilingualism, it's important to state that not all bilinguals are the same, or not all multilinguals are the same, since people learn languages in different contexts. For example, someone might learn it at home in childhood, but someone else might learn the same language as an adult in a classroom environment. So it's really important to take into account all of these external differences. Moving on, here are the research questions and hypotheses. The first one, is there a difference between learning languages as a young adult compared to a senior adult? I thought because the brain is different in different stages of life, there has to be a difference. The second one, can anyone learn languages to the same extent? Well, due to previous knowledge, I thought that everyone can. The third one, is the localization view still applicable? I was wondering if scientists were able to prove or disprove the fact that brain areas work either individually with their own tasks or all together connectedly. And lastly, can the use of neuroimaging techniques provide insight into the neurocorrelates of language learning in adulthood? With this one, I wanted to know if neuroimaging techniques are absolutely necessary in order to understand the brain processes, or there are ways around it that we can still learn about the brain. We're moving on to the method now, where I'm going to explain my study, and I will also talk about the results, and I will give conclusions. In my study, I interviewed 2 participants. They were both male, with a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD. They're both currently working in the languages and cognition field, so they're both neuroscientists, and they are researchers in universities in the Netherlands and Norway. On top of that, they are also both either bilinguals or multilinguals. I firstly contacted them per email in order to arrange online interviews, 1 per participant. Then on each day, we started the interview by me explaining the procedure and how I would be writing down their answers as they were answering to my questions, and they would not be recorded. So each of the interviews lasted for about an hour, and after that I was able to take my notes and put them into my study and use them in order to validate or disprove my hypotheses. So let's talk about the results. Participant 1 said that the brain doesn't work in individual parts, but it works as different networks working simultaneously. This is able to be seen thanks to the help of neuroimaging techniques such as MRI and EEG. He also talked about the fact that size, connectivity, and function of the brain are important parts into language learning, but they are not the most important parts. So they have a key role, since the fact that a child's brain is different than an adult's brain has an impact on the way you learn, but he put a special emphasis in the fact that anyone can learn languages at any point given, because what really matters is not the brain itself, but the experiences that the person has with the language. Participant 2 also talked about the fact that all regions of the brain are connected, so they are not working individually. He mentioned the different ways that they have to study participants, for example, the cross-sectional way, where they study different groups of people. As an example, we could see monolinguals versus bilinguals. And then the longitudinal way of studying participants would be scientists taking one group of people, for example, bilinguals, and studying them throughout a period of time. So the same group, but throughout a period of time. After that, he also mentioned the significance of neuroimaging techniques such as MRI, fMRI, EEG, and MEG. And lastly, he had also a strong emphasis in the fact that what matters the most when learning languages are the different variabilities that each individual has. So what kind of contact with the language and when they've learned it, at what age, where they've learned it, what was the environment like. So here is the discussion. Research question 1 dealt with differences in learning depending on the age of acquisition, and question 2 dealt with the human extent of language learning. What we can draw from all of this information from before is that the brain itself or the age itself is not the only thing that matters. There are many different things that affect language learning. And even if your brain is not specializing in learning at that moment, like it's in childhood, that should not be the main drawback for learning languages. What does this mean really? It means that even if as an adult, so at an older age, you have a strong objective and you have motivation for it, it will be a little bit more difficult due to the specialization of the brain. But it won't be impossible for you to learn languages to a native-like proficiency. Then research question 3 was about the applicability of the localization view. Thanks to the background information as well as the study itself with the interviews, we can say that it's not applicable anymore, since it's now proven that the different brain areas don't work by themselves, but everything works such as a network. So it's like all of the brain areas are working simultaneously. Lastly, research question 4 was about neuroimaging techniques. And yes, so neuroimaging techniques are able to help because we can see what's happening in the brain, sometimes in real time, sometimes not, but they are tools that are really needed in order for experts to be able to tell what is happening in the brain. With all of this, we've reached the conclusions. The big takeaway is that language learning is not contingent on age. So there are so many different things that are affecting the learning process that age is just a small component. Yes, it's important to keep a healthy brain by training it with language learning, but also learning new skills. But in the end, it's really significant to say that it's never impossible to learn a language to a native-like proficiency, even when you're a senior adult. So with all of this, I really hope that this is your sign to learn the new language that you've been wanting to learn for so long. Thank you so much for watching this, and I hope you enjoyed it.